The universe as an n-dimensional energy model. First part. Underlying hypothesis. Introduction. Most of the men of science who dedicate themselves to thinking and studying the theories which explain the genesis of the universe lean towards the Big Bang theory. This considers the universe as the entire set of matter, space and time that was confined to an infinitesimal point and that approximately 13,800 million years ago produced a cosmic inflation which gave rise to the universe. However, it seems more accurate to indicate it as the formation of our planetary system because they do not explain the genesis of that tiny space that expanded. The Big Bang theory was conceived by scientists upon discovering that our entire system was expanding rapidly. Based on this fact, they thought of a temporary anti-expansive setback. They concluded that initially the entire universe was contained in a very small volume, enormously dense and with a very high temperature. In order to validate this theory, scientists rely on the so-called cosmic background radiation discovered by physicists Arno Allan Penzias and Robert Woodrow Wilson, arguing that it is due to the expansion and cooling of the universe, a fact anticipated in the formulation of their theory. This theory aims to explain the origin of the universe in its entirety. With its postulates, it is possible to explain and understand not only our three-dimensional universe from a physical point of view, but it also extends it to other dimensions and also manages to conceive its metaphysical aspect. A. Basic generational principle of the universe. For the theory that is presented called the universe as an n-dimensional energy model, the concept of the universe differs from which considered in the Big Bang theory. Its conception refers to a whole community structured by energetic entities that essentially possess the capacity to exist and evolve to maintain it. In this hypothesis, the universe turns out to be more extensive. It considers not only the third dimension in which we exist as human beings, but also considers the universe as a system of energetic entities structuring a community made up of n minus one dimension. In addition, the theory presented here not only considers the physical processes that occur in it, it also incorporates its metaphysical component. It also postulates that physical and metaphysical processes structure its nature, which drives evolutionary processes, allowing energy to structure entities with better existential conditions. Analyze the universe as an energetic community through an existential concept allows us to give logical answers to most of the questions that the Big Bang theory cannot explain. The text called The Universe as N-Dimensional Energy Model is a compilation of ideas regarding this hypothesis. Here you will find some deeper explanations to events not scientifically clarified, such as the origin, purpose, and nature of gravitational forces, explanation of energy quantization, and present time as a temporary self-containment, processes of occurrence in a black hole, etc. In order to understand and conceive the origin of the universe, the n-dimensional energy model theory conjectured a time regression similar to the Big Bang theory, but with the difference that instead of considering the expansion of the cosmos, it does so in an evolutionary regression by considering that existence represents the most relevant concept of the universe. With this reasoning, it can be concluded that the universe at the beginning was structured with the simplest elements and with the least existential capacity. According to this theory, these fundamental elements are called one-dimensional basic energy. It states that before this energy, nothing existed. Consequently, this level of existence in its minimum value presents a limit with nothing. This means that if its existential level is decreased by any amount at this minimum value, it ceases to exist, restoring itself to nothingness. However, for this energetic generational event, with an existential nature from nothing to be possible, the co-creation of its inverse is necessary. In this way, when both are united, they cancel each other out. At this moment, it is imperative that the energy and the anti-energy in their creational instant present a minimum existential and anti-existential minimorum level, both in equal amount but antagonistic. This event can be understood by the following formula, where E plus represents energy, E minus to anti-energy. U symbolizes the union of both, the nothing that is conceptually absolute absence of existence. The energy in its beginning has a basically physical constitution, causing an expansion when emerging from nothing. This means that the anti-energy exerts a force of opposite nature, so it keeps both in a physical balance. The anti-evolutionary force of anti-energy is attractive and generates a monopolar type field directed towards nothing. This is known as the gravitational force. From a physical point of view in the universe, it means that the sum of all its physical energies will always be equal to the sum of the anti-energies. The energy to unbalance this equality and survive structures a community system which we call universe. Energy has a nature composed of two components, one physical and one metaphysical. These work together monolithically in their evolutionary processes in a similar way to the operation of a computer, with its hardware and software. Without these two peculiarities, the physical hardware and the metaphysical software components, energy could never evolve along a supervised route towards obtaining better existential conditions. Otherwise, its evolution would be errant. B. Basic concepts of the dimensioned energy universe. This hypothesis uses some terms that differ from the meaning of those normally used. For this reason, its meaning will be briefly explained according to this theory. Energy. Energy represents the essence of every entity in the universe. It is suitable to have an evolutionary existence, and itself generates from nothing continuously from a first time, due to its own existential nature. Our concept of energy is a little closer to that of a quantum mechanics than to the classical conception. However, in the present theory, the concept is much broader, since it considers energy as any entity that structures the universe in community. Anti-energy. Anti-energy has a nature opposite to that of energy. That is, it is anti-evolutionary or anti-existential. This anti-energy we know in our third dimension as gravitational forces. Universe. It is an association constituted by energetic entities. It presents a dimensioned organization where entities evolve continuously. This action allows them to structure dimensions with ever greater degrees of existential freedom and, at the same time, self-contain the lower dimensions. This allows them to continue their existence. Consequently, the main characteristics of the energy universe are its dimension structure, the self-containment of its energy levels, and its evolution-time relationship. With the purpose of explaining this fundamental trilogy of the universe, we will conceptually expose its dimensional structure. The universe is a system composed of n-1 dimension. These dimensions present selective characteristics with respect to their evolutionary levels. That is, to structure a certain dimension, the energetic entities must have a certain evolutionary level. This action allows them to enjoy an existence with a certain freedom degree. Self-containment. The energy levels of a certain dimension, with the exception of the first, self-contain the energy levels of the lower dimensions, thus achieving physical existential independence from it or them. This can be verified in our dimension with the quantization of energy, as described by modern physics. Evolutionary processes. corresponds to the continuous transformations that occur communally in the universe in order to achieve better existential standards. This concept is broader than the one considered by Charles Darwin's theory, which only includes changes in living beings. In this hypothesis, the evolutionary concept is more extensive since it considers the transformations for all energetic beings, even those who do not have life, because in the universe, evolution is communal and begins with lifeless entities until energy entities with higher existential levels are achieved that are born, grow, and reproduce. Time. It is the occurrence sequential measure of evolutionary events. This implicitly means that this event involves an existential change, consequently each entity presenting the previous state in past time. Time and evolution are monolithic with each other, which implies that there can be no evolution without time, or time without evolution. The n-dimensional energy model establishes that from the first generational event of energy, the temporary measurement is created, which we call T sub 0. Before this, nothing happened. That is, the first generational event in the universe had no past time. Antitime. The antitime is the measure of the occurrences of transformations in the annihilation process. In the antitime, there is also a before and an after, but in the opposite direction to the temporal or evolutionary trajectory. The anti-energy is not part of the energetic universe because its anti-existential nature tries to annihilate the entities that structure it. C. Nature of the universe. Considering that the universe is structured by energy with the purpose of conserving its existence through evolutionary processes, we can point out that the universe has an existential nature as a creative principle and reason for being. Consequently, the nature of the universe consists of a physical part and a metaphysical part. It is important to highlight that talking about the universe and energy is very similar because energy is a structuring part of it. Therefore, it can be stated that the universe is an energetic community. The n-dimensional energy model understands the physical aspect as any evolutionary process related to the matter of energy and the metaphysical aspect related to the guideline that guides these processes. The two basic concepts of the universe nature will be discussed below. Physics. Metaphysics. Physical concepts of the energetic universe. Physical concepts will be explained trying to understand through the existential concept how energy organizes a community dimensioned with selective levels in order to improve the existence of the entities that structure it through its evolutionary processes. Dimensioned organization. First of all, this hypothesis conceptually defines a dimension as a place formed by energetic entities that have certain evolutionary levels so that it allows them an existence with an established freedom degree. This theory considers that the universe is made up of n-1 dimension, starting the community evolutionary process along a trajectory that goes from the first dimension to the nth minus 1. With the established evolutionary purpose, generational energy is associated communally, initially structuring the first dimension with 1 degree of freedom, which is why its existence develops only with linear movements. It is considered that this dimension is the fundamental basis of the universe, which is structured by infinity of energetic lines whose lower existential value limits with nothing. Similarly, when energy continues its evolutionary process in a community way, it manages to structure the second dimension with 2 degrees of freedom. In this way, energy planes that self-contain the energy lines of the first dimension are established. Thus, it achieves an existential independence of the levels corresponding to the first dimension. In a similar way, the following dimensions are structured self-containing the energy levels of the lower dimensions. In this way, levels with greater existential independence are achieved. When the energy manages to evolve by surpassing the n-1 dimension, it would achieve a supreme existence in the nth dimension, with an existence totally independent of the anti-energy, where the evolutionary processes would end. The fundamental purpose of evolution. When energy self-generates from nothing at its lowest existential level, it has a physical and a metaphysical characteristic. Both give it an existential essence, and in this generational state, the basic one-dimensional energy has its physical characteristic more developed than the metaphysical. It is important to understand that energy achieves evolution only in a communal way. The anti-energy or gravitational forces do not evolve and always remain at their minimum anti-existential level. This implies that energy will be present throughout the universe and that it must always evolve in this anti-expansive environment that tends to its annihilation. Therefore, the fundamental purpose of evolution has an existential objective. This consists of achieving liberation from the anti-existential effects of gravitational or anti-existential forces. In this way, each energetic entity manages to evolutionarily possess a protective physical structure that allows it, together with the metaphysical aspect of the energetic nature, continue evolving. Selective dimensions. Within the universe, each of its characteristic aspects, whether physical or metaphysical, such as the evolutionary level, time, speed, temperature, existential awareness, the ability to integrate socially, care for the environment, etc., are distributed in stages in each of the dimensions. These can be distributed from highest to lowest, and others from lowest to highest value, without losing their evolutionary continuity when moving from one dimension to another. In other words, each dimension of the universe presents selective staggered ranges, a reason that allows energy entities to be a structuring part of each one of them if, and only if, their evolutionary level is within the respective required values. Continuous energetic evolution. As stated above, dimensions are selective. That is, they can be structured or inhabited only when the entities acquire an existential level that makes it possible. Although the dimensions have different degrees of freedom between them, the entire evolutionary process from the first to the nth-1 dimension happens continuously. Suppose, for instance, an entity that carries out an evolutionary process through time within a section of this universe, as illustrated in the figure below. It indicates the evolutionary process in a transition from the second to the third dimension. This change is relevant and is related to quantum physics due to the following. According to this graph, energy continuously evolves. That is, it goes sequentially from level 1 to 2 to 3, etc., without skipping any. The most relevant case occurs when passing from one dimension to another. In this example, one evolves from levels 5 to 6. That is, one goes from the highest existential energy level in the second dimension, level 5, to a minimum existential level in the third dimension, level 6, as a three-dimensional basic energy entity, thus acquiring a further degree of existential freedom. Existential freedom. Existential freedom refers to the capacity for self-determination that an energetic entity possesses. Evolution allows the different entities of the universe to increase their existential freedom. Within the universe, energetic entities present two types of existential freedom: degrees of freedom and free will. A. Freedom degree. They correspond conceptually to the number of axes in an orthogonal coordinate system necessary to determine the physical position of an entity within a specific dimension. This concept can be understood by means of the following figure. It shows that 1 freedom degree corresponds to the first dimension, 2 degrees to the second, and so on. Each entity evolves in a certain dimension with a constant freedom degree. It acquires 1 more degree when, evolutionarily, it manages to pass to the higher dimension. B. Free will. This is conceptually related to the evolution that an entity has internally in each dimension. This existential variable develops evolutionarily from lower to higher value, the minimum value corresponding to the basic energies, close to 0%, and the maximum when it is about to access the superior dimension, limit value at 100%. When an entity manages to reach 100% of its free will, it acquires the ability to structure the superior dimension. Energetic self-containment. Conceptually, the energy in a certain dimension self-contains the energy levels of the lower dimensions, achieving an existential emancipation from them. With self-containment, 2 relevant facts are achieved. A. Interdimensional self-containment. A certain dimension self-contains its lower dimensions, gradually achieving the existential independence of all its characteristic structuring energy ranges, with the exception of the first dimension that borders on nothing. Interdimensional self-containment is related to obtaining freedom degrees. As an example of self-containment, let us liken the universe to a Russian doll known as a Matryoshka. The smallest doll represents every energy level of the first dimension with a freedom degree. The second doll self-contained it, having an existence independent of these energies. That is, in the second dimensional universe that has 2 freedom degrees, the first energetic self-containment is achieved, and so on. That is, when one observes a doll, the ones inside it represent the quantized energy. The observed energy symbolizes the basic energy of the corresponding dimension. B. Temporal self-containment. Time is also a self-contained variable. Human beings achieve an existential consciousness that we call the present. This time is not divisible and represents an instant with evolutionary independence. In summary, the interdimensional evolution allows the energetic entities to increase the freedom degrees, self-containing the energies corresponding to the lower dimensions. Time and evolution. As energy evolves, it increases its energy level over time. On the other hand, its nature establishes a certain direction for evolution, which is why we can affirm that time, being a consequence of evolution, presents a joint trajectory. The inert entities of the universe have an evolution directed by this energetic nature in a rigid way. For this reason, we can make instruments for the time measurement, in some cases using quartz or by swinging a pendulum. These elements have no freedom of their own. The n-dimensional energy model postulates that from the second dimension, the time corresponding to the first dimension is self-contained or quantized. That is, this part of generational time is existentially emancipated. Temporal quantization implies the present tense. This means that in the human being, the present is greater than in a primate, and that as children we have a shorter present time than when we are adults. Consequently, we can affirm that time is relative. Therefore, evolution is also, since both existential characteristics are monolithically linked. In nothingness, time does not exist, since there are no evolutionary processes. Similarly, it would not exist in the nth dimension, where energy reaches its highest level. In both conditions, the energy does not evolve. The difference lies in its existential freedom, since in nothingness it is null, and in the nth dimension it is full. As a summary, we will say that according to the n-dimensional energy model, time is related to the evolutionary development of energy. That is, time or evolution is a path that directs the evolutionary processes of energy towards the nth dimension, always with positive entropy. Anti-time and annihilation. The nature of anti-energy is anti-existential. This tends to unite with energy in order to restore nothingness. This is called annihilation for this theory, which takes place in an anti-time and is a process with negative entropy. Suppose a three-dimensional entity is trapped by gravitational forces entering an evolutionary regression carried out in an anti-time. This would lead it, in the first instance, to be reduced in a basic three-dimensional energy. After this, it would pass to the second dimension until it became two-dimensional basic energy, passing to the levels of the first dimension to finally transform all its energy into one-dimensional basic energy, at which point, when uniting with the anti-energy, would restore nothingness. The restitution of nothing would only occur when the anti-evolutionary energy is transformed into one-dimensional basic energy. We can also state that annihilation is a potential energy recycling event. If energy is self-created from nothing again, this would happen in a black hole. Expansion of the universe. When the basic energies first emerge in their respective dimension, they produce a corresponding dimensional expansion. The first dimension would expand in a linear mode as basic one-dimensional energy self-generates from nothing. In a similar way, a surface expansion would occur when the energy passes in its evolutionary process from the first to the second dimension as two-dimensional basic energy, and the spatial expansion would also occur when the energy passes from the second dimension to the third dimension as three-dimensional basic energy. In other words, all the basic energies produce an expansion in their respective dimensions, as if they emanated from nothing due to the self-restraints of the lower dimensions. The expansion of the universe generally occurs due to the constant generation of energy as one-dimensional basic energy in the first dimension. In addition, the expansion of the universe occurs due to energy evolution when the corresponding basic energy emerges in their respective dimensions. Limits of the universe. According to the Big Bang model, the universe does not have a determined physical limit, as it does not present cosmic dimensions. However, if it is considered finite, some scientists dedicated to the astronomical study of the universe calculate that the universe expanded to a distance of approximately 93,000 million light years, but the time necessary for this expansion at the speed of light would only achieve 13,000 million years. This difference is inexplicable because the expansion speed is much higher than the speed of light, considering the latter as the maximum speed that can be achieved in the universe. Scientists are disoriented as they search for the limits of the universe across measurable physical distances in rapidly expanding space. The hypothesis of the n-dimensional energy model considers that we cannot conceptually speak of physical limits of length because for all observers the universe expands in all directions, as if it were in the center of expansion. This means that there is no defined limiting edge. This fact is similar to as if we were moving two-dimensionally on the surface of a rapidly expanding sphere looking for the non-existent limit. This is because the surface of a sphere is physically always continuous and our existence or evolution is related to time. This means that we can never have the same existence in the same place. To define its limits, the n-dimensional energy model similarly establishes how energy would be created, considering the evolutionary processes in their two temporal senses, going back into the past and projecting them into the future. Consequently, from an evolutionary point of view, the lower limit of the universe is nothing, and its upper limit is the nth dimension. In general, each dimension has, as its limits, its neighboring dimensions, the lower and the upper, with the exception of the first dimension, which has nothing as its lower limit, and the nth minus 1 as the upper limit to the nth dimension. Physical structure of each dimension. Each dimension is structured by energy entities that have the corresponding basic evolutionary levels. For example, the first dimension for its basic one-dimensional energy, the second by the two-dimensional basic energy, the third by the three-dimensional basic energy, and so on. On the other hand, it is important to remember that in each one of them, the physical and metaphysical characteristics of the lower dimensions remain self-contained, quantized, with the exception of the first dimension, which borders on its lower level with nothing. Consequently, the basic energy that is the limit with the lower dimension in each dimension becomes the structural unit of the entities which structure it. This means that each entity contains a certain amount of these basic structuring bricks that are quantized energy or self-containment of the energies corresponding to the lower dimensions. Dimension distribution of physical characteristics. In each dimension, the evolutionary physical characteristics of the universe are distributed by ranges. These ranges are increasing in some cases, that is, from lower to higher value, and others are distributed in a decreasing way, that is, from highest to lowest value. This distribution indicates the existential particularity of each of the dimensions and gives us clues as to what existence would be like in the nth dimension. Some of the most relevant physical characteristics are the following. A. The freedom degrees. As explained above, the energy evolutionarily structures various dimensions that have different freedom degrees from each other. These vary from lowest to highest value, that is, the first dimension with a degree of existential freedom for the energetic entities that comprise it, the second dimension with 2 freedom degrees, the third dimension with 3 freedom degrees, and so on. B. The speed of the displacements. The speeds ranges possible to develop by the entities in their displacements within their respective dimensions are distributed from higher to lower value. In this way, the one-dimensional basic energy is the energy entity that can develop the greatest speed in the universe, which is why the universe seems immeasurable to us. This is due to the fact that the highest speeds are developed in the first dimension, and, on the other hand, this condition allows, in the first evolutionary stage of the universe, to generate an energy base, first dimension, that allows entities to evolve in later times and structure higher dimensions. C. The physical structure of energy entities. The basic one-dimensional energy represents the minimum existential level minimorum, being the basic structuring element of the universe. This basic energy requires grouping to start the evolutionary processes that form more complex structures over time, until reaching the third dimension that human beings inhabit. We do not know more complex entities or with a higher evolutionary level than ours. That is, this characteristic goes in the universe from lower to higher level. D. The temporal speed in evolutionary changes. The evolutionary speed in the universe goes from lower to higher value because time is self-contained from dimension to dimension and also in the evolution carried out within them. For this reason, when we were children, the time before Christmas seemed to pass more slowly than when we were adults. Human beings can realize this phenomenon due to the evolutionary level that we hold and because of the relationship that exists between the present time and temporary self-containment. E. Entropy. Relating the concept of entropy that encloses the second law of thermodynamics consistent with the molecular disorder of a system, we can affirm that according to the theory of the n-dimensional energy model, the entropy in the temporal direction of the universe is increasing. This implies that each evolutionary event is accompanied by at least one entropy increase, never a decrease. This solely decreases in the process of annihilation of energy. anti-energy tries to convert it into one-dimensional basic energy, the simplest and lowest entropy fundamental element. The summary of the distribution of the indicated physical characteristics can be seen in the following table. How energy manages to maintain its existence by evolving. Energy manages to unbalance the initial physical balance it has with anti-energy when it emerges from nothing, establishing an evolutionary community. In this way, it increases its existential level, avoiding its annihilation. Considering that the anti-energy does not evolve, the metaphysical part of the energy cannot be counteracted by the anti-energy, because the gravitational forces present a physical force of an anti-existential nature. The metaphysical part only manifests itself in its anti-existential nature aimed at annihilation. We can observe in our third dimension how the energetic entities form different geometric structures that are generally symmetrical in at least one axis. Examples of this are the structures of atoms, the solar system, the planets, the human body, the leaf of a vegetable, the body of insects, etc. Each symmetrical structure of energy produces a stability whose states allow energetic entities an existential security, protecting themselves from the danger of the physical gravity forces. Metaphysical concepts of the energetic universe. As explained above, energy has an existential nature composed of two monolithic aspects, the physical and the metaphysical. Now we will explain its metaphysical characteristics, that is, the basic concepts of how this nature guides the evolutionary processes will be exposed. Reason and existential purpose of energy. For the theory of the n-dimensional energy model, exist is to participate or occupy a structuring place in any of the dimensions of the universe in a time greater than t sub 0 in the first dimension or in a present time for dimensions older than the first. In order to maintain its existence, energy must evolve communally from the first to the nth minus one dimension to ultimately achieve an existence completely independent of gravitational forces. Therefore, energy has an existential objective which consists of reaching the nth dimension evolutionarily, achieving in it a supreme existence. Existential guideline of evolutionary processes. The hypothesis that energy evolves over time, achieving higher and higher energy levels through energetic entities, guided by an existential guideline, represents one of the basic principles of the n-dimensional energy model theory. In the case of abiotic elements, we can observe in our physical, chemical, biological studies, etc., that under equal conditions we will always obtain the same results. For example, in chemistry, we know that the union between two hydrogen atoms with one oxygen atom under certain conditions will always form a water molecule. On the other hand, depending on the temperature and pressure, it would achieve the three states of matter, liquid, solid, and gaseous, reason why it is possible to formulate a large number of physical, chemical, biological laws, etc. In general, being able to replicate the interaction between abiotic elements that do not have action freedom indicates that there is a guideline in the universe that directs these physical processes as they are not erratic. The scientific verification of physical, chemical, biological laws, etc. are based on the concept of the guideline of the evolutionary processes described above. Living beings with greater existential freedom manage to choose between more than one option, but there will always be a guide according to the energetic nature of the universe, depending on their evolutionary level. For example, the human being has a highly evolved conscience which points out the path that is most convenient for his existence and community, being an aid for the use of his free will. This theory maintains that the evolutionary guideline of energy coincides with entropy processes greater than or equal to zero, indicated by the second law of thermodynamics. Existential awareness in energetic entities with free will. To the extent that energetic entities evolve, they develop the ability to become aware of their own existence. This awareness allows the human being to have feelings, sorrows, joys, well-being, etc. Most notably, it allows him the insight that he evolutionarily achieves, with which it can discern the relationship of its acts to its consciousness. That is to say, we can deduce that in the first dimension, the energetic entities would have no existential consciousness, and their life would be guided only by the energetic nature with processes of positive entropy. The human being has evolutionarily managed to possess an existential consciousness. As an example of this fact, we can indicate that when we locate ourselves in a place with great vegetation, rivers with waterfalls, a forest full of life with animals and plants, we will feel a sensation of pleasure and well-being. On the contrary, if we are in a nauseating dump full of rats, we will feel aversion and disgust. Consequently, our conscience is a guideline that guides us to choose among several alternatives the most adequate for our existence. Relation between present time and existential consciousness. We can divide time from our existential point of view into past and future. According to this theory, among these is located the present that corresponds to a self-contained or quantized time. This theory considers that there is a relationship between consciousness and the present. The present would correspond to a temporary self-containment. This period, or instant, depends on the evolutionary level of the energy entity, a reason that leads us to reflect that it is relative. Regarding these concepts, we can point out that the only past and future times can be measured or referred to in relation to a time measure. For instance, yesterday I got up at 7 a.m. and tomorrow I have a meeting at 7 p.m. The present represents only an imperceptible and indivisible moment of time due to its self-containment. In the present, we have existential awareness, something that does not happen with the past or the future, since in them we do not have existential cognition. Regarding the past, we can only have memories and evolutionary effects on our physical and mental makeup. As for the future, we ignore everything because it only means an existence probability. Evolutionary norms in the universe. The universe, due to it, is an energetic community structured with an existential purpose. Each entity must dedicate its existence cooperating with this community purpose. For this reason, its actions must be according to the universe nature. The community of the universe and/or its entities must govern its existence basically by the following precepts. Every entity must be a participant in the community structure of the universe and must govern its existence by the guideline given by its energetic nature according to the evolutionary level it holds. Energetic entities must privilege the community before individual well-being at times when both alternatives produce contradictions that cause inconvenience in achieving the existential purpose of the universe. Because it is a community with an existential purpose, each energy entity submits its existence and/or cooperates in favor of the development of entities that hold the higher existential level, with the purpose of continuing to evolve the evolutionary lines with a higher level. Nature will always favor the strongest energetic entities from an evolutionary point of view and will eliminate the energetic entities that cannot adequately carry out the existential purpose of the universe. The concepts of good and evil. When an entity evolves, it will always benefit the universe as a whole. This means that it will always interact with actions of positive entropy that will be called good. Contrarily, anti-evolutionary actions with negative entropy will be called evil. Therefore, the good is intrinsic to the energetic evolution and is constituted by acts related to the nature of the universe. The concept of good is represented by all the facts that benefit the energetic evolution of the universe. Evil is related to the action of the anti-energy that tries to annihilate existence, trying to restore nothingness. The concept of evil is closely related to the gravity forces. Entities with free will always have good alternatives. We can only point out that some will be better than others. Limits of the universe. The n-dimensional energy model considers the universe as a dimension system structured by energy, which is in constant evolution. It considers that it is not logical to determine the limits based on the physical distance. According to this theory, the limits of the universe are existential, so nothing is considered as its lower limit, and the nth dimension as the upper one, as shown in the following figure. I think that the biggest mistake scientists present today is to consider the universe only as a three-dimensional structure. For this reason, when scientists observe the microscopic, it seems indeterminate because of what is infinitely small, and, on the contrary, when they look at the cosmos with enormous telescopes, their limit also confuses them because of what is infinitely large. According to the present theory, each dimension has limits. For instance, the third dimension limits in its lower part with the second dimension, and in its upper part it limits with the fourth dimension, only if n is greater than 4. If n were equal to 4, it would be the nth dimension. Nothingness and the nth dimension are external to the universe. They are not part of it. They only represent their lower and upper bounds, respectively. Dimensional distribution of metaphysical characteristics. The evolutionary metaphysical characteristics of the universe are distributed from the first to the nth minus 1 dimension by increasing or decreasing ranges. This distribution indicates the existential particularity of each one of the dimensions and gives us indications of how the extreme existential characteristics would be like in the first and in the nth minus 1 dimension. According to the latter, the supreme existence in the nth dimension could be discerned. The distribution of some of the most relevant metaphysical characteristics of the universe are: A. Free will. The free will of an energetic entity is dimensionally distributed from lowest to highest percentage. Thus, it can be pointed out that in our dimension, an elementary particle has a free will of just over 0%, and the human being one closer to 100%. B. Existential consciousness. This characteristic that some entities possess is directly related to their evolutionary level. This means that existential consciousness does not exist in inert entities. Its evolution is directed only by energetic nature and/or physical processes with positive entropy. Consciousness begins when entities achieve a certain freedom in their lives, that is, a living beings that can decide their actions among various alternatives. This means that existential consciousness is dimensionally distributed from lowest to highest value. Basically, existential awareness allows human beings to realize our being as an energetic entity, in addition to our environment with the entities that accompany us in the dimension we inhabit. Existential consciousness is related to the present time, which is where we manage to conceive it. C. Community organization. The fundamental concept of the creation of the universe corresponds to an energetic community organization as an evolutionary association. This goes from the individual to the collective, that is, dimensionally it is distributed from less to greater community sense. We will analyze this organization in the human being as it is the most evolved entity in our planet. In their beginnings, human beings formed small communities that basically lived by hunting and gathering, of which many were nomads in search of areas that allowed them to feed according to the different times of the year. Later, they managed to dominate livestock and agriculture, being able to settle, founding small cities that over time became more complex and numerous places. The summary of the distribution of the metaphysical characteristics indicated, we observe them in the following table. End of the first part. In the second part, under construction, some features and conjectures of the n-dimensional energy model theory will be explained. The universe will be analyzed in relation to its genesis, its evolutionary processes, and its existential purpose.